In the autumn of 2015, I embarked on my academic journey as a freshman at the prestigious University of Alabama. A few weeks prior to the commencement of classes, I was introduced to my roommate, a jovial individual named Brandon. We had been in touch, eagerly anticipating the start of our university life together. However, due to unforeseen family circumstances, Brandon had to make a last-minute switch to a different institution. As the first weekend rolled around, the dormitory was abuzz with students meeting their roommates and settling in. I, on the other hand, found myself unpacking alone, still awaiting the assignment of a replacement roommate. Despite this, I managed to acquaint myself with some of the other friendly students residing on my floor. On Sunday night, a new face appeared in the dormitory hallway. He was carrying a backpack and seemed a bit disoriented. I approached him and inquired if he had just been transferred to our building. He confirmed my suspicion. I then asked him if he was assigned to dorm number 5, a pseudonym I'm using for my actual room number. To my surprise, he affirmed that indeed he was. I extended my hand, introduced myself, and informed him that we would be sharing the room. He introduced himself as Robert, but insisted on being called Charles, a preference I found unusual, as I had never met a Robert who preferred Charles. I guided Charles to our dorm room, which I had already personalized on my side, while his side remained untouched. He casually tossed his backpack onto his bed, flashed me a smile, and in a slight Turkish accent, mentioned that he hadn't brought all his belongings yet. He then proceeded to pull out a sheet from his backpack and spread it over his bed. As the clock struck 9, and with the first day of classes looming, Charles and I spent the remainder of the evening engaged in conversation on our respective beds. I attempted to gauge his personality as one does when meeting a new person, especially a roommate. Charles was somewhat reserved, with a deep voice and a slightly awkward demeanor. However, I refrained from passing judgment, understanding that initial meetings can often be nerve-wracking. After a while, Charles lay down on his bed, using his backpack as a makeshift pillow. It appeared incredibly uncomfortable, and I couldn't fathom how or why he chose to sleep in such a manner. I offered him a pillow, which he gratefully accepted. As the night wore on, I drifted off to sleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up abruptly, unsure of what had disturbed my slumber. The room was eerily silent, devoid of even the faintest sound of Charles's breathing. I turned to my side and was startled by the sight of a tall figure looming over my bed. It took me a moment to realize that it was Charles. He quickly apologized, explaining that he was merely heading to the bathroom. My heart was pounding, and I was too flustered to question why he had been standing over my bed. He apologized once more before returning to his bed. I reassured him that it was okay, but needless to say, I was wide awake after the incident. I spent the rest of the night sleeping with my back to him, trying to shake off the discomfort. The following morning, I woke up to my alarm, noticing that Charles was still in his bed, seemingly asleep. As I rummaged through my bag to gather my books, I couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that something in my bag had been tampered with. I glanced at Charles, who was still feigning sleep. The events of the previous night and the unsettling feeling about my bag left me with an uneasy feeling about my new roommate, Charles. Having made the decision to safeguard a few of my more precious possessions, I hastily stowed them away in my backpack, which I typically carry to class. During the class, I took the initiative to send an email to the housing department. Subsequently, I submitted a request for a room change online, citing that my roommate's behavior was causing me discomfort. Upon returning to my dorm after class that day, I was taken aback to find the door propped open with a door stopper. I observed a large duffel bag resting on Charles's bed, leading me to speculate that he was in the process of unpacking. I reclined on my bed, engrossed in my laptop, and after a while, Charles entered the room. He acknowledged my presence with a greeting and proceeded to his bed, where he stowed his duffel bag underneath. He then turned to look at me, his face devoid of any discernible emotion. I feigned indifference, but his peculiar behavior was increasingly unsettling. I eventually returned his gaze with a less than amicable expression, to which he responded with a slight nod. He then climbed into his bed and began idly scrolling through his phone. Later, I decided to head out to the dining hall for dinner. Upon my return, I found Charles still in the room. His constant presence was perplexing, and I wondered if he ever intended to leave the dorm. I inquired about his class schedule for the day, to which he responded affirmatively, mentioning he had just one class that day. That night, after switching off the lights, I noticed Charles propped against the wall in his bed, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone. I couldn't shake off the feeling that he was watching me. Eager for a response from the housing department, I checked my email, only to find a reply that was far from what I had hoped for. The lady who responded expressed confusion regarding my request, stating that my replacement roommate had not yet been assigned and that I should be the only occupant of the room. I turned to look at Charles, who met my gaze. I contemplated asking him if he had his room key on him, but decided against it. Instead, I gathered my laptop and other belongings, packing them into my backpack and duffel bag, all the while under his watchful eye. He remained silent, and I had the distinct impression that he was aware of my suspicions. Without uttering a word, I exited the room, sought refuge in a safe location, and promptly reported him to the campus police. By the time they arrived at the dorms, Charles, or whatever his real name was, had vanished, taking with him his sparse belongings. That night, I discovered that he had pilfered some of my clothes, my iPhone charger, and some food I had stored in my closet. As for his habit of watching me sleep, I could only surmise that he was ensuring I was asleep before rummaging through my belongings. I had unwittingly shared my room with a complete stranger, possibly a homeless person, for nearly an entire 24 hours. My actual roommate moved in 2 days later. During my junior year at college, we resided in a campus suite that comprised 4 dorm rooms. This suite was home to half of my friend group, and we all shared a common room along with a compact kitchenette. Our friend Cody, who was initially part of our suite, decided to move off campus into an apartment with another friend. Consequently, the school administration automatically assigned us a replacement. Unfortunately, this replacement was a student named Rodney. Rodney appeared to be a normal enough guy. He had short blonde hair, a patchy light beard, almost non-existent eyebrows, and he was quite tall, around 6'4", with a medium build. His room was located in the far corner of the suite, adjacent to mine. We each had our own private rooms, so there were 4 of us in total living in the suite. Rodney seemed to be a bit of a recluse during the first few days. However, one day when I returned from class, he was sitting in the living room. He mentioned that he needed to share something with me. He then revealed that he suffers from parasomnia, which was the reason he was transferred from his previous dormitory. I was unfamiliar with the term until he explained that it's a sleep disorder that may cause him to talk or yell in his sleep due to night terrors. He wanted everyone in the suite to be aware of his condition so that we wouldn't feel uncomfortable. To be honest, having this as the first real conversation with him made me feel more uncomfortable than anything else. I was hoping to get to know him on a more personal level, not discover that he has a sleeping disorder. I also didn't fully understand why he felt it was necessary to disclose this to me. I texted in the dorm group chat, which still included Cody, to see if Rodney had informed them about his sleeping disorder. They all responded in the negative, followed by laughter and confusion. When my other 2 suitemates returned later, we congregated in the common room and speculated why Rodney's sleep disorder might have been the reason for his transfer from his previous dorm. Then Rodney walked in, gave us a slight nod, and proceeded to his room, shutting the door behind him. We had the TV on at a high volume, so we whispered amongst ourselves about him. That night, I was startled by a knock at my door in the middle of the night. I asked who it was, but received no reply. I ignored it, but couldn't help wondering if it was Rodney. The next day, I asked my friends if either of them had knocked on my door the previous night, and they both texted me saying no. Cody found the whole situation amusing. I was already feeling uneasy and hoped hoped this wouldn't become a regular occurrence, because it was already quite disturbing. A few nights later, the situation escalated. It was the middle of the night, and I had already woken up. I checked my phone and saw it was 2 a.m. I heard footsteps outside in the small hallway of the common area, followed by another knock at my door. This time, I chose not to respond. I was certain it was Rodney, and his behavior was beginning to unsettle me. It was evident that he was a severe sleepwalker. I immediately texted our group chat at 2 a.m., informing them that the incident had occurred again. They didn't reply until the morning, claiming they hadn't heard anything. I suspected this was because Rodney's room was directly adjacent to mine. That day, I decided to confront Rodney. I knocked on his door and inquired if he had been the one knocking on my door in the middle of the night. He confessed that he had no memory of such an event, but apologized nonetheless. He hadn't previously disclosed that part of his parasomnia involved sleepwalking. He assured me it was entirely harmless, and that I shouldn't worry. However, I didn't exactly perceive it as harmless, especially since it was disturbing my sleep and causing me considerable distress. An indeterminate amount of time passed, which I can't precisely recall, but it was probably less than 4 days. During this period, there were no other unexpected knocks on the door in the middle of the night, which I was relieved about. However, this story wouldn't be worth telling if something else hadn't transpired. One night, I was awakened by a noise in my room. As I surveyed the dark room, I spotted Rodney standing in the corner, facing the wall, and muttering to himself. I called out Rodney's name, and he turned towards me, repeatedly uttering the phrase, "Open the door." I was genuinely disturbed. He was looking in my direction, but it felt as though he was looking through me, not at me. I noticed a smile on his face and heard what sounded like a faint laugh as he exited the room and disappeared from my view. I was unsure whether I should wake him up or not, as I had no knowledge about sleepwalking and sleep disorders. The room fell silent. I reached for my phone, intending to text my friends, but was interrupted by a deafening bang on a door outside, accompanied by Rodney's voice screaming, "Open the door!" He was yelling like a deranged madman. I rushed to the common area and saw him at the opposite end of the hallway, pounding his fists on one of our suite mates' doors. I ran over to Rodney and began shaking him to wake him up. My two friends also emerged from their rooms due to the commotion, and we all tried to rouse Rodney. He eventually stopped, looked at all three of us with a blank expression, apologized, and returned to his room, closing the door behind him. The three of us stood there in shock, unsure of what to say or do. Someone from a neighboring room must have alerted the campus police because they soon arrived at our door. We had no choice but to tell them the truth. Rodney spoke with them for a while before retreating to his room. That night, I made sure to lock my room. The next day, Rodney had vanished, leaving no trace of his presence. As I've mentioned, I don't know much about sleepwalking or related disorders, but what I witnessed didn't seem like typical sleepwalking to me. I'm not sure what was going on in Rodney's mind, but it's clear that he needs professional help. Last fall, I started college. I hated it. The classes were hard. The people were cold. I had a hard time making friends. And then there was Addison. Addison was my roommate. We were randomly assigned by computer, and it couldn't have been more obvious. We had nothing in common. I was a nerdy, self-conscious, tall girl that frequented the computer labs. She was a blonde, petite softball player who spent her Saturday nights partying and her Sunday mornings in church. She was friendly enough when we both happened to be in the room at the same time. She'd say hello. Sometimes she'd borrow my shampoo without asking, of course. Sometimes I'd borrow one of her fancy schmancy granola bars in retaliation. Generally, things were okay, even though they weren't great. Until the night of October 19. I got back late from an engineering class. As I felt the chill leave my cheeks in the warm hallway of our dorm, I heard a scream from our room. Addison. Then she yelled, "No! Get out!" I ran to the door, shoved my key into the lock. I thought I was about to stumble on an attempted rape. Addison didn't exactly hang with the best crowd, and she had a posse of frat guys that followed her like bees after honey. "Addison, are you okay?" She was alone, just lying there, crumpled on the bed, all by herself. When she heard me, she whipped around in surprise. "Oh, sorry, I must fallen asleep," she said. She sat up and stretched. "Sorry, what were you saying?" "No, just I heard you yelling. Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. Must have been talking in my sleep, haven't done that since middle school." She let out a little giggle. Sleeping. My eyes fell on the bed, where her phone lay. It was mid-call with someone. I could see the little phone icon on the screen, see the numbers timing the length of the call. "You were on the phone with someone?" "No, I was asleep." I stared at her. Okay." I decided not to press it. Maybe it's just a fight with a hometown boyfriend or something, or her parents. But then, why did she say, "Get out"? No one was in the room with her. The next week went by without anything too exciting. My classes got a bit harder, and I spent more and more time over at the engineering school. Every night, by the time I got back to the dorm, Addison was already asleep. I could hear her light snores coming from across the room, see her cross necklace dangling from the jewelry hook on her dresser. On Friday night, I got home a little earlier than usual. I didn't have a problem set due until Tuesday, so I figured I'd relax a bit. As I walked down the hallway, it was dead silent. The light flickered overhead, and I felt a chill course through my body. I've never seen a building this empty. I immediately shook my head, trying to extinguish the thought. There's nothing wrong with a dorm being empty on a Friday evening. People go into town, hang out with their friends. Some even take trains into the city for the weekend. The light flickered again. And besides, there probably are people here. They're just sleeping, or on the computer or something. My footsteps softly thumped across the carpet. The gold 21 screwed to our door came into view. I pulled out my keys with a jingle and put them into the lock. I twisted the doorknob. The room was dark. Addison out partying, as usual, I thought to myself with an eye roll. I set my backpack down against my dresser, unhooked my bra, and climbed into bed. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through Reddit, sent off a text to my mom. The silence remained. The minutes ticked by, and I realized I hadn't heard a single sound in almost 20 minutes. My heart began to pound. A prickly, uncomfortable sensation crept up my arms, up my neck. Something is wrong. Something is very, very wrong. I looked up from the phone. The dim glow of the screen lit up the room in a soft glow. The shadows were black and blurred, but as my eyes adjusted to the dark, they came into view. There was something on Addison's bed, something long, stretching up to the ceiling. I squinted in the darkness. It was Addison, standing on the bed, her head almost touching the ceiling, staring down at me. I yelped and jumped back. "Addison, what are you doing up there?" I shrieked. "You nearly gave me a heart attack." She opened her mouth. It seemed to stretch wider than ever before, in a sunken O shape that was blacker than the shadows around her. I already got the others. I ran out of the room, down the hallway. I could hear the footsteps pounding behind me. I raced down the stairs. The lights flickered. I swung open the door. Then I collapsed, gasping in the cold, crisp air. They found the bodies the next day. 17 people total. All of them were found dead in their rooms. Cause of death? Asphyxiation, even though none of them were hanging from ropes or showed any signs of being strangled. Addison herself was found dead in our dorm room, blade out across her bed, the cross hanging from her neck upside down,